Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hello, everybody. My personal update today is going to be that I have some songs from the musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat stuck in my head. Interestingly, I was a musical theater kid and really a musical theater young adult. And I've been enjoying introducing musical theater to my kids, and I'd never really heard that musical before. But I was looking for some more kid-friendly musicals, and it came up, and so we were listening to it together. And Andrew Lloyd Webber, very catchy, so it's in my head. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. Today, I wanted to answer a listener question on this podcast on a topic which is related to knowing what you want. I'm obviously thinking and talking a little bit more about how to know what you want because enrollment is currently open for my How to Know What You Want course, and it closes on Tuesday, May 5th. I also wanted to say that I am doing 3 live coaching calls just for folks in this enrollment. So if you want to be coached by me, you can be coached once or twice or even 3 times by me. And there's such a difference between working through whatever you're working through on your own and getting a skilled coach in there on a problem. So I would really recommend signing up, particularly for that reason now. And if you're trying to make a decision about career or parenthood or to live or just strengthen those skills for the future when you need them, the link to join my course is in the show notes. And again, enrollment is only open for less than a week from when this podcast will release. So with that all in mind, I did want to answer a listener question on the topic of knowing what you want. So this listener, Stephanie, wrote in saying, I am really struggling to make a really huge decision that will affect my own and many other people's futures. What I really want doesn't feel possible or an option because in order for that to happen, other people would also need to join me in that, and they simply aren't willing to. So how do I choose a lesser suckier option or keep holding out for the small chance/miracle that maybe one day it could happen? And then she gives some more details. She says, I created a ministry that I adore and love with another individual 13 years ago. Shortly after our honeymoon phase, I realized that who he portrayed himself to be and who he really is are entirely 2 different people. And she gives a Wicked reference here. Actually, as a side note for me, Katie, I will say I did not realize that we were going to have 2 musical theater references so close to each other in one podcast, but here we are. So she says, if you've seen the movies Wicked 1 and 2, he's the wizard that in public everyone esteems, but behind closed doors, he's very abusive. But he spins Elphaba, who has consistently advocated for those who don't have a voice, as the wicked one. And she goes on to say, I have suffered in silence and endured the pain that he has caused for over a decade because I did not want to make the pain and our own issues to destroy the beautiful ministry that is helping so many people in miraculous ways. It is affecting me very negatively in every way, and now it is harming others too, which I'm also having to help them through his negative impact on them also. And we are now at a crossroads because we either need to refinance the property we are existing out of or sell it or shut everything down and move on in our own separate ways. She says, I don't want a divorce, quote unquote divorce, of course, but I also cannot continue to endure this toxic relationship. My biggest fear is I don't want to give up on anything prematurely if it could become what it was always supposed to be someday. But that feels out of my control, so I don't know what to do with that. And she gives a bit of other context, which I'll share as we go, but mostly it kind of echoes this. So first of all, Stephanie, I just want to say thank you so much for answering this question. My heart goes out to you in what sounds like it must be such a challenging situation. And it sounds like it has been a challenging situation for many, many years. I wanted to answer your question because I think it gets at a human reality that sometimes isn't discussed enough. And that is sometimes our options are just bad. In fact, sometimes our options are downright shitty. And there's not a secret door that's going to reveal an option that involves Prince Charming and a free cruise and a new car. There's really just us and a really tough situation and bad options. And we'll talk more about your options, but it sounds like that may be true of you here. You have at least two kind of bad options, stay and endure this problematic relationship that is harming you and others, or leave and walk away from this important organization that it sounds like you co-built and that does help a lot of people and you've poured your heart into for 13 years. So the first thing I want to offer you, Stephanie, and everyone else who has options that feel hard or scary or just bad or shitty, we all know on some level that this is part of walking the path of being a human in the world. I've certainly been in this situation too. Sometimes we have our back against the wall and the only path forward is through some sort of muck. It's not necessarily that you're missing something. It's just that sometimes in life, the task before us is to choose between bad options. So I want to talk about what to do about it. Okay, so if you were my client sitting across from me, the first thing I would want to know is, what options are we actually working with? What's the complete option set? You shared, Stephanie, two options as far as I could tell. The first one was to kind of keep going how you've been going. You mentioned that explicitly. You said that one of your options was to, and this is a quote that you said, keep holding out for the small chance/miracle that maybe one day it could happen, that he will change. But you have also said elsewhere that he probably won't change. And given that you've worked with him for 13 years and he hasn't, him not changing seems like the most reasonable assumption here, if we're trying to be clear-eyed about things. So that option is really more about continuing to endure working with him for the sake of your mission or organization or the people you help. But that's a real option. You've been choosing it so far, so you can keep choosing it. So that's that first option. And the second option seems to be something around leaving. I wasn't clear in your note about what leaving would entail. Would it be the same kind of work, but perhaps you start your own venture, or would you join another organization? Are there different kinds of ventures you could create yourself? Are there different kinds of organizations you could join? Is there a possibility where you might pivot careers in a more serious way? If I was working with you, I would want to specifically flesh out each one. And this might seem like a really minor thing. Like, isn't the big question just leave? But I do find it to be important because I find that with knowing what we want, the more vague things are, the harder it is for our navigational equipment to react to it. So it's best if we can really flesh things out, like name explicitly what the alternate option or options are, so we can give our inner navigational equipment something concrete to respond to. You're just going to get a better signal that way. So there's clearly those two options, though, again, leaving might involve many things. So there might actually be 4 options here or 6 or whatever it is. But I wasn't totally clear from your note whether there were other options in addition to those. Like, is there an option to kick this guy out from this organization entirely, or at least try to? You mentioned something about needing cooperation from others to do this, and perhaps they weren't on board. But I couldn't tell sort of how hard you tried. I also felt curious about whether there's an option to work at this organization, but in a more limited capacity, maybe, simultaneously building something outside of this organization on your own. You didn't name this explicitly, but I would imagine that there might be financial implications here to leaving this thing that might be playing a role, like leaving guaranteed income for no income. That might be influencing you in a way that, is putting a finger on the scale. So is there some kind of in-between option that wouldn't put you totally in that position? The point here is that I just want to make sure that you are kicking off by being as creative as possible about every option that you would reasonably consider. One thing that I do mention in my How to Know What You Want course is that, on one hand, involving other people without a lot of care and intention can really mess up your compass. So we have to be very, very careful. However, idea generation is one of the few times where I think it can be often very useful to involve other people, not necessarily to get their opinions, but actually just to get new and potentially very different ideas from them. You want to do this very carefully. You may not even want to tell them, I'm not interested in your opinion. I just want to say, is there a door that I'm missing? Is there a possibility that I'm not seeing? But that's the first sort of strategy that I would want to make sure that you have pursued. I want to make sure that we have the full list of genuine options, not things you're not actually going to do under any circumstances, but real things you would consider. And then once you've laid that out, I think the next step for you would probably be some serious fear reduction. And if those of you who are listening to this are in the course, my course, or you are going to join us in the course, I just want to reference that all my material about fear reduction is in the Step 4 module. That includes step-by-step instructions for that core mental decluttering practice that I strongly recommend, plus more than 10 questions I ask and more than 40 suggested thoughts to think, just to get that sort of background. But you, Stephanie, you seem very weighted down by fears. There's 3 big ones that I've heard or read between the lines. I'll list them here. The first one is something you've explicitly said, am I giving up on anything prematurely? You said very explicitly in the beginning that this is your biggest fear. Am I giving up on anything prematurely? That's one fear. The second fear that I'm getting the sense of, and I'm not sure you explicitly said this, but it's something along the lines of, I shouldn't give up on something if it has a lot of good to it, even if there is some or a lot of bad to it. So again, something along the lines of I shouldn't give up something if it has a lot of good to it, even if it has some bad to it. And then the third is some sort of fear around leaving. I'm going to flesh that out in a moment too. So I talk in How to Know What You Want about how fear reduction works best when we engage with each of our thoughts very precisely. So I want to go through each of these as precisely as I can, given my limited information. The first fear, you phrased it as, again, am I giving up on anything prematurely? You explicitly said that this was your biggest fear. So because it's your biggest fear, we need to look at this with a lot of rigor. This particular fear is very interesting to me because you also wrote, both in what I shared and then also in some additional elaboration to me, that you felt that he probably wouldn't change. You even said you felt that he was an abusive narcissist, and narcissists rarely change. So on one hand, you have this big fear, your biggest fear, that you are leaving prematurely because maybe he'll change and this organization can become what it's meant to be. But on the other hand, you've pretty explicitly said that you know that he likely won't change. So my invitation to you is to take the time in writing to decide what you actually believe. Do you actually think he's going to change, or do you not? And I know that our brains can get swirly and go here and there and everywhere, but I want you to nail it down and decide. Because if you don't believe he's actually going to change, then it's impossible to give up on anything prematurely because he won't change. Those, again, are not my words. Those actually are your words. And again, I think we can use our brains here, but if you've worked with him for 13 years, he hasn't changed, then probably assuming he will continue to not change is a reasonable assumption. But again, is there actually anything to give up on prematurely here? This is your biggest fear, so we got to nail it down. And of course, once we nail that down, it's not uncommon, this is so common in fear reduction, but it's not uncommon for a new fear, a new thought to arise in its place. As I was kind of feeling into how that might go for you, a thought that I came up with was, if you finally decide, okay, I don't think I'm giving up on anything prematurely. I've been here for 13 years. If something was going to change, it would have changed already. There might be a new thought which came up along the lines of, I would be so sad to give up this thing that had so much good to it, even if there was also bad in it. Or maybe a thought might arise like, I shouldn't give up on something if it has a lot of good to it, even if it also has bad to it. I'm going to say those two again. Maybe once you decided what you believed about whether or not you're giving up on him prematurely, you might have a thought like, one, I would be so sad to give up on this thing that has so much good to it, even though it also has a lot of bad to it. Or I shouldn't give up on something if it has a lot of good to it, even if it also has a lot of bad to it. I'm not sure you're having those exact thoughts, but if I imagine why you don't just leave, given that he's so terrible and causing so much damage to you and others, I would imagine that something like this is in there. So then you'd want to work on that next thought if it is there. Is it okay to leave something that has a lot of good to it? Is it okay to give up on something that is helping people in quote unquote miraculous ways? Those are the phrases you used. Is that okay? And can that ever be the best choice? Again, I have instructions for how to work on thoughts like these in my How to Know What You Want course, but even some basic journaling and asking yourself these kinds of questions about thoughts like this will take you far. And I want you to genuinely decide and force your brain to focus on those questions and resolve what it believes. So those are the first two sets of fears that I could imagine being there. And the third, it seems to me that there's some sort of fear of leaving. I'm not 100% sure what it is. It might be a couple things. Is it financial? Is it fear of leaving these people behind who you help? Is it fear of letting go of this organization you spent 13 years building? But you need to be clear in your brain, is this okay to do? Or is it not okay to do? And if it is okay to do, when is it okay to do? Do you meet that criteria? There's no absolute answer here. The point isn't what your parents or community or what more than 60% of people would say. It's what do you actually believe? It's possible that you actually believe that you should, for example, completely destroy yourself if you are part of an organization that is doing good for others. You can believe that if you want. I'm not even stopping you, but if you do, I would want you to believe it on purpose, believe it consciously, and to see, the results that will have. Oh, that landed in my body. I'm going to say that one again. Maybe you believe that you should completely destroy yourself if you are a part of an organization that is doing good for others. You can keep believing that. But if so, I want you to believe it on purpose and believe it consciously. And as a side note for you, Stephanie, and for all of you who are listening, notice what came up in your body when I offered you that thought. Did you feel a sense of tightness in your belly or your chest? Did you feel open somewhere, belly, chest, back? Was something electric moving through you? Noticing those reactions is something that I call embodied testing, and I teach more about that and how to know what you want, but it's a really interesting way to figure out what you actually believe. And finally, I will say, is it possible that some of your thoughts or fears are not true? This is one of my favorite ways of coaching, just poking holes in all of my clients' fears. Like, yeah, I'm not sold that that belief is true or that this one is true. So for example, maybe, if you're afraid that you won't be able to build a new organization, maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you'll actually build a new organization even faster than this last one, and it will touch even more people in an even better way. Or if you're concerned about financials, maybe it's possible that you'll make back your salary faster than you thought. But we want to challenge each of those thoughts systematically on paper, not in your head, on paper, to assess if they're true. I say it over and over in my How to Know What You Want course, work like this, work that reduces our fears. It's not a one and done kind of work. You're not going to do it one time. Most of the time, it's small. Once might be enough, but many times you will get the most out of it if you do it daily or at least several times a week. You might have to do that several times a week, at least for a month, but the quality of your results will directly correlate with the frequency of repetition. In other words, more results will come from more repetition. And Stephanie, the last thing I want to say here is this. There is a moment where I sometimes look my clients in the eye and say, if you are uncomfortable with how messy this room of your brain is, if you're uncomfortable with how chaotic it feels to be inside your head with all the swirly fears and thoughts and how you can't actually sense rightness in any way, it is within your power to make this better. I'll say that again. It is within your power to make this better. You can reduce your own fears. So I want to empower you, Stephanie. You have the power, if you want, to get this room of your brain neater, to make the fears be less. You can do it. I know you can. And my recommendation in particular would be to prioritize this, because my experience of reading your letter is just that the fears are really loud right now. So that's the second thing I want to offer you. Go neaten up that room of your brain, and I think it would yield some big dividends for you. And then the third thing I wanted to offer, the final point I want to offer, is an invitation for you to examine your beliefs about rightness. I talk about rightness quite a bit in the context of figuring out what you want. To me, rightness is this grounded experience, sense that, yes, this is the right path for me. It's not purely cognitive, it's felt. And to me, there's actually a spiritual element in the most intrinsic sense of being called to something, or just the ways in which we can kind of know something on that deepest level. I don't always lead with referencing spirituality here on my podcast because many folks who find their way to me are not consciously spiritual. But given that it sounds like your own faith is very important to you from the very little I know about you, I wanted to name that here. I don't personally belong to any particular organized religious group, though I would describe myself as a spiritual person. And when I work with religious or spiritual clients, we will sometimes talk about questions like, what is God inviting me into? When we are also talking about rightness. With my non-religious clients, questions like, what is life inviting me into? And what is life asking of me? Evoke similarly kind of useful responses. And I will say, whenever I ask those questions of myself, questions like, what is God inviting me into? Or what is life asking of me? I feel a movement of energy. I feel something get stirred up within my chest and my belly. I wonder if any of you listening do too. So first, I will say these questions would be really interesting for you to ask yourself around this topic. But I mentioned them on purpose to give some context to our discussion about rightness and what you believe about rightness or what you believe about what God or spirit or life is asking of you. In my observation, some of us, and we often do this unconsciously, but some of us are assuming that rightness will be pure and gilded and easy and obvious. And it's like the universe has given us a flashing pink neon sign saying, if you go in this direction, it will feel good and easy. And to me, rightness can exist even with options that have pain and fear and, yes, some wrongness mixed in. There might be some pain and some wrongness, Stephanie, in giving up something you've spent 13 years building, or in leaving some people behind that you know you could help with this ministry. For example, if that's a path you choose. Again, I don't 100% know what your fears are here. I'm just assuming that's at play. So my invitation with you is to ask, do you believe that rightness can exist even with something that has darkness or grief or anger there too? In my experience, sometimes rightness is just the direction that has a very subtle increase in the amount that we can breathe, or a very subtle sense that there's more space to move. And what's coming up for me now is that all of this may be a little bit conceptual, so I want to make it tactical. So to be very tactical, after you have generated your options and you have reduced your fears, I would love for you to sense how the remaining options feel in your body. That's step 2 of my How to Know What You Want course for those who are interested. And then I would love for you to ask yourself, where is there just a little bit more space to maneuver? In which of the options is there a little bit more space to breathe? In which of the options is there a little bit more room for life? And finally, in which of the options is there a little bit more spirit or even God, if those are words that resonate with you? There's a lot more I could say. I started putting together a whole additional section sharing some ideas about filtering to a final decision, which is something I talk about in step 5 of How to Know What You Want, but I ended up cutting it because I wanted to stick to the 3 biggest things that really stood out to me. I hope that I've given you some tactical ideas and also asked some questions that provoke some more reflection in you. And obviously, this offering that I'm giving here of ideas would be even better if we could have some back and forth coaching on it. So for all of you listening, for Stephanie, anyone here, I will say my How to Know What You Want course, this particular enrollment has 3 live coaching calls with me. And last time I ran the course, I'm pretty sure I coached every single person who raised their hand to be coached at the beginning of the call. So if you would like to be coached by me live, which I think is even better than what I can share on this podcast because we can actually kind of, follow some trails together to figure out what's at the root cause. I would love for any of you listening to join this course. Enrollment's now open. It closes May 5. You can find a link to sign up in the notes to this podcast. So Stephanie, I'm rooting for you. Everyone who is listening to this in the middle of, or who has been through, or who will face a tough decision with bad options, I'm rooting for you. This is real and human, and I know that you're going to find rightness in your way. Talk to you soon. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks,
which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.